Good day, students. So, this is your lecture 1, and our topic for today is learning the language of literature. First question: what is literature? So, generally speaking, literature, which comes from the Latin word litera, which means letters, okay? So, litera meaning letters. So, literature, it refers to artistic compositions that are designed to tell stories, dramatize events, express emotions, and analyze and advocate ideas. Works which were written before the invention of the printing press were obviously spoken or sung and kept only as long as people learned and practiced them. While many of these oral literatures are lost, many of them have also been recovered and preserved as printed texts. There is still an oral tradition of literature with many poems designed to be read aloud in their entirety, and with all the plays intended to be performed and spoken by live actors. Today, however, writing and printing give life to most literature. As a result, reading and appreciating literary texts are often a highly private, personal, and a silent experience. So, in literature, um, before the printing press were discovered or were invented, literature before that were mostly presented orally and not preserved because of course hindi pa invented yung printing press, so hindi pa siya nare-record, hindi pa siya nape-preserve. So some are preserved when the printing press were invented because they are usually practiced or usually sung, but not all of them are documented. Some of it are lost. So that is the sad thing. Yung mga important literature that we might discover was lost. It's because we're not really that technologically advanced when on the old days. So, um, you know, yung literature kasi, we said on the last part of the definition, it is a result of reading, appreciating literary texts, or often highly private, personal, and a silent experience. So we all know that when we read, it is a silent experience. What we read, what we imagine while we are reading, it is a private and a personal experience. Okay? So, meron tayong tinatawag na genres of literature. So, pag sinabi nating genre, these are categories of literature. So, meron tayong 5. First is the prose fiction. Second is the poetry. Third is the drama. Fourth is the nonfiction prose. And fifth is the creative nonfiction. While all are art forms, each with its structure and style requirements, the first three are usually classed as imaginative literature. Okay, again, yung first three, which is the prose fiction, the poetry, and the drama, we call that imaginative literature. Because the genres of imaginative literature have a lot in common, but they also have distinctive features. So, pag sinabi natin imaginative literature, it is a product of the writer's mind. It is not based on reality, it is just a made-up story and produce from the mind of the writer. Okay, so again, prose fiction, poetry, and drama is imaginative literature. And then the fourth, how about the fourth and the fifth, which is nonfiction, prose, and creative nonfiction. So I'm sure you know the meaning of nonfiction. So nonfiction is the opposite of fiction. So nonfiction, it is based on reality. It happens in real life. Okay, so first genre of literature, what is prose fiction? So in prose fiction, it includes novels, short stories, myths, parables, romances, and epics. So fiction originally meant anything made up, crafted, or shaped. But as we understand the word today, it means a prose narrative based on the author's imagination. Okay? Prose fiction, it is a product of the writer's mind. But prose fiction is a free verse literature. Wala siyang measurement, wala siyang limitations. And prose fiction, it is a it was or it is being manipulated by the writer. Yung writer yung gumagawa ng mga sequences, okay? It is crafted, it is made up, and it was shaped. So, although fiction, like all imaginative literature, may introduce true historical details, it is not real history. For its purpose is primarily to interest, divert, stimulate, and instruct. The essence of fiction is narration, the telling or recounting of a sequence of events or actions. Works of fiction typically focus on one or more characters as they undergo change as they interact or deal with other characters. So if you have watched or if you have seen historical movies in the Philippines about Emilio Aguinaldo, about Jose Rizal, we can say that it is not a non-fiction story. It might be a prose fiction because we don't know what really happens in history. Some of it are relayed based on the books, but some parts of it are not really that true. Some parts of it are manipulated by the writer of the story, okay? To make it more intense, to make it more dramatic, I think. So that is prose fiction. So poetry. Poetry, I know you love this. It is more economical than prose fiction in the use of words, and it relies heavily on imagery, figurative language, and sound. So in poetry, it is a measured kind of literature. Okay? So in poetry, we use figurative language. So pag sinabing figurative language, we use the words, but we doesn't use its literal meaning. It means another, okay? So in figurative language, it we use words but without its literal meaning, okay? So for example, the man runs as fast as the wind. Okay? So if you will analyze the sentence literally, it will be impossible. But if you will analyze the sentence as a figurative language, you know what I mean. Okay? So that is poetry. Third is drama. So it is literary work. It is a literary work which is designed to be performed by actors on stage. Like fiction, drama may focus on one or more characters and presents dramatic events as if they were happening at present, to be performed on stage and witnessed by an audience. So what is the difference of drama to fiction prose? Because drama can be a fiction prose. So the difference of drama to fiction prose is that it is played and presented live on a stage. Okay? So yung drama, it is usually presented on stage. Okay? So fourth is the nonfiction prose. So nonfiction prose is an imaginative literature differs from nonfiction prose. The fourth genre, which refers to any kind of prose writing that is based on facts and deals with real people, things, events, and places. Again, nonfiction prose, it is based on facts, deals with real people, things, events, and places. The text must conform to what is true and cannot be manipulated by the writer's imagination. Major goals of nonfiction prose are truth in reporting and logic in reasoning. Okay, so yung writers, they are just relaying stories that stories that happen in real life. Okay, they can't manipulate the story. They can't add imaginative conversations, because if they will do that, that will not be non-fiction prose anymore. Okay, that is not just relaying the true story. Okay, so what if a writer is writing a non-fiction prose, but he incorporated an imaginary conversation that doesn't really happen at all in the reality. So what do we call that? We call that creative nonfiction. Okay, so creative nonfiction, it is a combination of the nonfiction prose and the fiction prose. So the distinction between fiction and nonfiction has become blurred in recent years. Yes, because right now there are a lot of stories based on reality, but we doesn't really know what happened on the true story. There are not documents to prove that it happens, what happens really in reality. So it is really blurry. It is really hard to identify a fiction and non-fiction nowadays, because a lot of stories had been telling that this story is based on reality, but they have added some fictional parts so that they can intensify the story. Okay, so that is the deal today in storytelling. Okay, so fictionists frequently base their stories on real life scenarios and imagined characters, and historians often inserted fictional conversations to convey historical figures, thoughts, or views. This genre of writing is called creative non-fiction. It is a form of writing that incorporates literary styles and techniques to construct factual stories. Are you familiar with the Netflix series The Crown? So, yung The Crown, it is a series about the royal family of England. Okay, so Queen Elizabeth, Prince Charles, Princess Diana. If you are familiar with that, their story is being um, reflected or displayed on that series and titled The Crown. But they are claiming that it is based on reality. But mm, the royal family of England are now releasing statements that the story is not really reflecting their story. It is a drama. It is a fiction. It is not their story. It is just inspired by the royal family, but it is not their story. Because who will know what happens inside the palace if no one has been there? Even the directors or the writers of the story, they didn't know what happens inside the palace. So how will we know if the series is really based on reality? Okay, so we might we might see parts of the crown very identical to the videos that the royal family have in public. So meron silang parts like the wedding of Prince Charles and Princess Diana, or the coronation of Queen Elizabeth. So it is very identical to what happened before, but there are certain parts that there are no way of knowing if it is true. So there are parts that are true, there are parts that might not be true. So we can identify that series as a creative nonfiction, like a combination of fiction and nonfiction stories. Okay? So, meron naman tayong tinatawag na the language of literature. So, the language of literature, as to language, literature can be divided into three forms: the prose, the verse, and the poetic prose. So, prose is the most typical form of language. It is a type of language that uses ordinary linguistic structure and natural speech flow rather than metrical structure. Novels, short stories, essays, fable, folktale, legend, myth, narrative, saga, and science fiction are examples of prose fiction. So yung prose fiction, in simple terms, it is a free verse language. Doesn't have measurement. On the other hand, a verse is a type of language in which language is used for its artistic and suggestive qualities in addition to its apparent meaning. Examples of verse includes poem and songs. So yung poems and songs, it has its rhymes, it has its measurements, yung words are counted, yung lines are counted, so yun yung verse. But what is the combination of prose and verse? So that is what we called the poetic prose. So finally, poetic prose, it is a type of language that uses prose and verse at the same time. When a literary piece is written with special attention to its beauty and special attention to its meaning, then the language used is called poetic prose. Okay? So, meron naman tayong tinatawag na standards of literature. So, these standards of literature is what the writer should meet every time they are writing something. Okay? So, for a literature to be somehow successful, writers must meet these standards because this is what readers are looking every time they are searching for a good literature. So, first standard is artistry. So, artistry, this is a quality which appeals to our sense of beauty. Okay, so an appealing story is somehow passable to artistry. For example is if you have like a story, it's storytelling. So obviously it has appealed to our sense of beauty. Okay? So 2 is intellectual value. The intellectual value or the intellect. So it has something on related to our mind, to the brain. Okay, so intellectual value is a literary work stimulates thought. It enriches our mental life by making us realize fundamental truths about ourselves, about other human beings, and about the world around us. Okay, so in simple terms, it simply makes sense. Okay, it has sense. So number 3, suggestiveness. So this is the quality associated with the emotional power of literature. Great literature moves us deeply and stirs our feeling and imagination, giving and invoking visions above and beyond the plane of ordinary life and experience. If a story made you laugh, made you cry, made you fall in love, that is something that is passable to the standard of literature, which is suggestiveness. Okay? So number 4 is the spiritual value. This is somehow related to our moral aspect. Okay? So literature elevates the spirit by bringing out moral values, which makes us a better person. The capacity to inspire is part of the spiritual value of literature. Okay? So number 5 is permanence. A great work of literature endures. It can be read again and again as each reading gives fresh delight and new insights. Okay? So for example, yung mga classic literature natin like Florante at Laura. In English, ano ba? Romeo and Juliet. So these stories has established their permanence. Okay? So number 6 is universality. Great literature is timeless and timely. It is forever relevant and appeals to one and all, anytime, anywhere, because it deals with elemental feelings, fundamental truths, and universal conditions. One strong example of this is the essay of Carlos Bulosan, a Filipino notable writer. Ang title ng essay is The Freedom from Want. Actually, I have read that when I was in high school, and right now I'm still reading that for me to teach in the Philippine literature subjects. Okay, so if you have read the essay, you know how strong it was because it is relatable, it is timeless, and timely at the same time. Because yung essay, The Freedom from Want, is written by Carlos Bolosan when he was experiencing racism and discrimination in America, when he have moved and migrated in America. Okay? Carlos Bolosan was from a poor family in the Philippines, and then he wants to be successful, but then he thought that he will be successful in America. So he traveled by ship. Imagine how long that travel was. So he traveled by ship, migrated to America, but then what he experienced in America is far more worse than what he experienced in the Philippines. He experienced racism and discrimination from the Americans because that time um, Americans are not really welcoming. Okay, so if you are familiar with the white Americans um, being being fought over by the black Americans because of discrimination, slavery, it also happens on Filipinos in America. Same condition. Okay, so white Americans are really not welcoming that time, but it is really far more different right now, but still evident pa rin yung discrimination. Medyo discriminating pa rin yung culture ng America, but not the same level of discrimination that they have given to our ancestors, to old Filipinos living in America before. Okay, so moving on. Number 7 is style. This is the peculiar way in which a writer sees life, forms his ideas, and expresses them. Great literary works are marked as much by their memorable substance as well as by their distinctive style. Style should suit content, sabi ni Garcia Rosales and Barranco noong 1993. So, to these seven qualities of literature, we should add an eighth aspect equally essential to literature, which is the form. So, yung form, it is the design of the work as a whole, the configuration of all its parts. The form answers the question how. Okay? How well the work is made, how well the work is written, or how well the work is done. In a literary work, nothing is by accident. Even the smallest detail is an artistic decision made by the author. Every element in a literary work ought to contribute to the effectiveness, meaning, and beauty of the whole. So that is the form, yung kabuuan ng isang literature. Okay? So, defining fiction. So, fiction is a term used to describe creative prose work. It is an imagined story usually written down that the author tells in ordinary and natural language. That is simply fiction. It is a product of an author's mind, manipulated by the author or the writer, shaped by the author. Okay, so everything was made as a made-up product of the author's creative mind. That is fiction. So, meron tayong types of fiction. So, literary and commercial fiction are the two main types of fiction. Remember that. Literary and commercial fiction are the two main types of fiction. Commercial fiction attracts a bigger audience, while literary fiction appears to attract a smaller, more imaginative audience. So, yung commercial fiction, commercial fiction might be films, so it is really easy to understand if you will just see it in your eyes. That is commercial fiction. That's why it attracts a bigger audience. While literary fiction, you will use your brain to analyze everything that is happening on the story. That's why it attracts a smaller, more imaginative audience. Another way of categorizing prose fiction is to look at genre or style. So here are some examples of prose fiction by type. So, number 1 is a novel. You know a novel? A novel is a fictitious prose narrative of considerable length and complexity, portraying characters and usually presenting a sequential organization of actions and scenes. Okay, so novella. What is novella? Is it different from a novel? Yes, it's kind of different from the novel. A novella is written fictitious prose story less than a novel. It is shorter than a novel, yet longer and more complicated than a short story. Okay? So, novella is not a short story. Novella is longer than a short story but shorter than a novel. So, examples of novella include Jack Steinbeck's Of Mice of Men, George Orwell's Animal Farm, and many more. Examples of prose fiction by type number 3 is a short story. So, a short story is a piece of fiction dealing with a single incident, material or spiritual, that can be read at a sitting. It is original, it must be sparkle, excite, or impress. It must have unity of effect or impression, and it must move in an even line from its exposition up to its close. Kung sa novel, maraming sequence of settings, maraming conflicts, maraming characters. In short story, they have one conflict. Okay? So, that is short story. So, a short story can be a fable or a parable, real or fantasy, a true presentation or a parody, sentimental or sarcastic, serious in intent, or a light-hearted diversion. It can be any of this, but to be memorable, it must catch the eternal in casual, invest a moment with the immensity of time. So that is all for today. So thanks for listening, and I hope you have learned something from me today. If you have questions, you can message me through my email. So eliza.ramos at lspu.edu.ph, or my Facebook account, which is facebook.com/mameliza.ramos. Okay, so thank you, and that's all for today.